Welcome to SplitSecond. If you want to buy the best sleeves or other magic-related accessories, head down to Dragon Shield using the affiliate link below. This week we bring you commanders from the new Magic the Gathering Universes Beyond set, Warhammer 40k. David is on a Magnus the Red deck aimed at getting enough creature tokens to lower the cost of a couple of big spells, or ultimately win the game casting and recasting buyback spells. Elder doesn't quite have an infinite mana outlet for his Dockside or Food Chain loops, but he's still playing them regardless with the Swarmlord. Rodrigo built a Pinger deck tribal with Ghyrson Starn at the helm, aimed at providing Ghyrson with any sort of curiosity effects he can in order to draw plenty from several pingers or one-power attackers. Lastly, Bal put together a Marneus Calgar deck, aimed at achieving infinite mana to draw the whole deck through Marneus' ability and finish with a Ballista or Praetor's Grasp, having left Thoracle out for better content. Wink? David is going first, and he kept his first 7 with his Steam Vents and Scalding Tarn for lands. Lion's Eye Diamond is mostly for Breach lines and Fellor Stone for ramp. Gamble can pivot his game plan, while Muddled Mixture serves as interaction or tutors for Dockside or Pull from Tomorrow like cards. The Legion Warboss is great at swarming his board with creature tokens. Elder mulliganed once and found quite a scary Hydra, which can perhaps buy him some time. Forest, City of Brass and Prismatic Vista for lands. Dress Down is great interaction versus several stacks or ETB creatures these days. Gamble an Eldritch Evolution to pivot his game plan. Rodrigo also mulliganed once, finding an Iron Mesa and Polluted Delta, with a red dork for a ramp, Ragavan. Raid Bombardment adds on to the pingings Ghyrson can do, Faithless looking to dig for a curiosity effect, while Loyal Apprentice and Firebrand Archer can maintain a steady flow of pings to trigger Ghyrson. Lastly, Bal looked at his first hand, just hoping to draw into more lands, since a single Hallowed Fountain paired with a Lotus Petal and Jewel Lotus allows him to cast Marneus on turn 1. From there, with the appropriate black sources, he can use both his tutors, Vampiric, Demonic and Wishclaw Talisman to get into the game, Cyclonic Rift for some removal. Ready for the match? David starts the game with a Scalding Tarn, cracking it right away for a Volcanic Island. He then casts a Lion's Eye Diamond and follows it with his Gamble. He searches for a Sol Ring and randomly discards his Steam Vents, ending his turn. Elder draws a Simian Spirit Guide, which he exiles right away to help cast a Gamble as well. He searches for a Mana Crypt and randomly discards an Eldritch Evolution. He then plays a Forest and casts a Mana Crypt to then cast Mana Gorger Hydra, and players groan as it hits the table. We're on Rodrigo's turn. He plays an Arid Mesa and cracks it for a Volcanic Island. He casts a Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, triggering Mana Gorger Hydra for a counter, and we'll hold up right now to tell you that for narration purposes we will skip all the Mana Gorger triggers, but we'll still animate them so you can keep up and maintain a fluid pace. Bal gets to his turn, plays a City of Brass and then casts a Lotus Petal, following that with a Jewel Lotus, and he does cast his commander Marneus Calgar, hoping to perhaps be able to trade with the Hydra. We're back to David. He plays an island and casts his Sol Ring. He then casts a Legion Warboss and proceeds to combat, creating a Goblin token that must attack this turn. He sends it towards Rodrigo, who doesn't block, and we're back to Elder. He is slapped by the Crypt for 3, draws, plays a City of Brass and attacks Bal for 7 with the Hydra, ending his turn. Rodrigo draws and jumps to combat, attacking Elder with Ragavan. It connects, creating a treasure and exiling a Finale of Devastation, which is quite a good hit, being regularly an outlet to infinite mana. Rodrigo then plays a Polluted Delta and cracks it for an untapped Steam Vents to cast his commander Ghyrson Starn Killer Morph, before passing. Bal untaps and ponders for a second on his upkeep. He draws, plays an untapped Hallowed Fountain and attacks Elder with Marneus, hoping to perhaps win a commander damage race with his Cyclonic Rift at hand. We're back to David's turn. He plays an Urza Saga, entering and gaining its first ability. He then goes to combat, creating another Goblin token and sending it towards Elder, and Warboss attacks Bal, mentoring the Goblin. In the second main phase, he casts his commander, Magnus the Red, and passes. Elder untaps and wins his Crypt roll. He plays a Prismatic Vista and cracks it for a basic island, to then cast a Tribute Mage, entering and triggering to search for a Nim Death Mantle, which he also casts to grow his Hydra. He then attacks David for 11 and passes the turn. Rodrigo gets to his turn and attacks Bal right away with Ragavan, triggering for a treasure and exiling Transmute Artifact. He then plays a Scalding Tarn on his second main, cracking it for a mountain, and follows it with the Firebrand Archer. He now casts a Faithless Looting, triggering the Firebrand Archer to ping each opponent by 1, and therefore Ghyrson Starn triggers to shock them as well. He draws 2 and discards 2, passing the turn. In the end step, Bal casts a Vampiric Tutor to search for a Mana Crypt to the top. He untaps, draws and casts the Mana Crypt. Trying to be the most mana efficient possible, he casts a Demonic Tutor, thinking on a Gilded Drake to steal the huge Hydra, but eventually finding a Scuttle Tide, which can then combo with Ashnod's Altar that he can tutor with his Wishclaw Talisman. David now untaps with quite a board. He draws and is sacked against his second ability. He plays a Sea Gate Reborn, paying 3 life to come untapped, and proceeds to combat, creating another goblin that must attack. To try to avoid this new token from being blocked, he actually attacks with War Boss as well, all creatures towards Rodrigo, mentoring the small goblin, so Rodrigo is less prone to block. He does decline any blocks, and Magnus triggers for a 3/3 red spawn token. In the second main phase, he transmutes Muddle Mixture for a Cyclonic Rift, and passes holding those 3 mana open to cast it thanks to Magnus. Elder untaps and he loses the crit roll. He draws and casts a Gitaxian Probe. Considering Bal has 3 in hand, David has 2 and a Rift, he targets Rodrigo to try to find out what his deck is about. He draws and then ponders for a second on attacks, but eventually he does attack David to make him fire his Cyclonic Rift, and he does so. In response though, Rodrigo casts his Ghyrson Starn in order to make David crack his LED, in case he does want the Rift to resolve, and David indeed does pay for it. With a board clear, at least David is relying on top decking now. Elder now recasts his Tribute Mage, entering and triggering to search for an Arcane Signet. He then casts his Mana Crypt to help cast the Arcane Signet and ends his turn. Rodrigo plays a basic island and casts his Rhystic Study, following that with his Ragavan and passes. Bal gets to his turn, and considering David still has a great board, he casts the crit without paying for Rhystic Trigger, so Rodrigo can perhaps also find some answers. Without much else to do, he casts an Isochron Scepter, triggering Rhystic and not paying again. It resolves, but it's not a dramatic reversal that it imprints, but instead a Cyclonic Rift to hopefully control the board a little bit. We're back to David's turn. He draws and is Earth Saga against his third and last ability, and he activates it to create a construct in response. He then searches for his Skull Clamp to play and follows it by casting quite a great top deck, a Professional Facebreaker, and Rodrigo draws from Rhystic. He proceeds to combat, creating a Goblin token and attacking Rodrigo with it, while Magnus goes towards Elder and the spawn towards Bal. Rodrigo does block the Goblin with his Ragavan, hoping to deny David the treasures. As Bal mentioned, he won't bounce the Facebreaker, which triggers to create 2 treasures, and another spawn from his commander. In the second main phase, he cracks 1 treasure to equip Skull Clamp on a 1/1 Goblin, killing it and drawing 2 cards. He then casts a Gitaxian Probe, paying 2 life to see Rodrigo's hand. Rhystic triggers and Rodrigo draws from it. Some niche cards worth checking, and after that David plays a tapped Mystic Sanctuary and passes. Elder untaps and now loses the crit roll. He draws, and without much to do at hand, he casts his commander, the Swarmlord, hoping to have some blockers for David's increasing board. Rhystic triggers and Rodrigo draws, ending Elder's turn. Rodrigo draws and instantly casts his Dockside Extortionist. Bal asks David if his hand is scary enough for this to resolve, and with such low life totals, Bal ends up casting a Force of Will, pitching Scuttletide to it. Rhystic triggers and he doesn't pay. In response though, Rodrigo casts a Pact of Negation, but as Bal and David pass priority, Elder is also keen on saving his life points and casts a Force of Negation on that pact, triggering Rhystic, and Rodrigo draws but finds no answers, so in order to avoid discarding a lot to hand size, he exiles the Simian Spear guy to help cast Cassic Flame Breather and follows that with the Sigil of Sleep, targeting them and triggering them so his opponents lose 1 life. He then casts his Mox Opal, triggering Cassic Flame Breather to ping his opponents, which in turn triggers Sigil of Sleep, and he returns both David and Elder's commanders to their hands. As he goes to his end step, Bal activates his Isochron Scepter to cast a Cyclonic Rift on David's construct. Rhystic triggers and Rodrigo draws. Bal then untaps and once again takes 3 from the crypt. He draws a Verdant Catacombs that he plays and cracks to find an Underground Sea. He uses it to cast Witchclaw Talisman, triggering Rhystic, and he doesn't pay. He then activates the talisman, giving it to Elder, and searches for a Sol Ring, which he casts right away. Rhystic triggers and Rodrigo draws. He doesn't have many outs and just wants to survive a turn cycle. David draws and jumps to combat right away, creating another Goblin token. He sends both spawns towards Rodrigo, the Facebreaker towards Elder, and all Goblins towards Bal. No one blocks, and in order for Bal not to be relying on his crit to see another turn, he activates Isochron Scepter to cast another Cyclonic Rift on one of the 2/2 Goblins. Rhystic triggers and he doesn't pay. Damage connects and Facebreaker creates 3 treasures. In his second main phase, David equips Skull Clamp on the 1/1 Goblin, killing it and drawing 2 cards. He found what he needed, so he casts his commander Magnus the Red. Rhystic triggers and he doesn't pay for it as he's tight on mana. He now cracks his 4 treasures to cast a Nexus of Fate. Rhystic triggers once again and Rodrigo draws, but finds no answers, so David proceeds to his extra turn. He draws and jumps to combat right away, creating another Goblin and attacking Elder for a lethal with his commander. Bal takes lethal from the Goblins and Facebreaker, and both spawns attack Rodrigo. No one blocks, and it's the final showdown between the EZ players. He got 3 treasures from Facebreaker and another spawn from his commander. On his second main phase, he now casts an Enter the Infinite for 7 mana. Rhystic triggers and he pays for it. He draws his entire library and makes sure to show he's putting Nexus of Fate on top of his library. He then casts a Mana Crypt, triggering Rhystic and not paying. He follows it with Birgi, God of Storytelling, and Rodrigo draws yet some more lands. He now casts a Lotus Petal, triggering Birgi and Ristic, and he can't pay. He gains 1 red from Birgi and now casts a Mox Diamond, triggering Birgi and Ristic again, and uses Birgi's early floating mana to pay for it. He discards a Mana Confluence, and with the 2 rocks he casts a Capsize with Buyback on Rodrigo's Ristic Study, once again triggering Birgi and Ristic and using the mana from before to pay for it. Now, with his single red mana, he demonstrates a loop, where he casts Searing Touch, targeting Rodrigo, and paying its buyback cost due to Magnus the Red's ability. With each cast he generates 1 red mana from Birgi that allows him to recast it over and over again. GG. Since this was a fairly short match, we decided to play another one. This time Bal won the dice roll and is going first. He mulliganed down to 6 though, finding a Vault of Champions and a Phyrexian Tower for lands, with a Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond for ramp. Ashnod's Altar can be paired with training grounds that he can find with Enlightened Tutor, so he sent Grand Abolisher to the bottom. David kept his first 7, risking that 1 lander on finding a land from Ponder. Failure Stone and Talisman can slowly ramp for Dockside Extortionist, which would eventually unlock his commander and reduce the casting costs of Frantic Surge and Intuition, which both can search for winning pieces. Elder mulliganed once and kept a Tropical Island and Steam Vents for lands, with a Mind Stone and a Devoted Druid for ramp. Neoform and Model Mixture can help in search for stuff like Dockside and Blasting Station, Fierce Guardianship for some stack interaction. Finally, Rodrigo also mulliganed once, having found quite a big start, with an Arid Mesa and Flooded Strand for lands. Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus will help him on a quick start with Ghyrson out. Loyal Apprentice can start creating some 1/1s that will easily trigger his commander, solve the equation and gamble to pivot his game plan. Ready for round 2? Bal starts the game drawing a Dark Ritual, which is not quite what he wanted to imprint on his Chrome Mox. He plays a Vault of Champions and simply casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Phyrexian Tower and passing. David plays a Polluted Delta and cracks it for a Volcanic Island. He casts a Ponder looking for a land, but finds none, so he shuffles before drawing. He did find a Lotus Petal, which he casts before passing. Elder simply plays a Tropical Island and passes. Rodrigo starts things with an Arid Mesa, cracking it for a Volcanic Island. He then casts a Mana Crypt and follows it with a Jewel Lotus, which he cracks to help cast his commander, Ghyrson Starn Kellermorph. In response to it, Bal fires his Enlightened Tutor, and considering Ristic Study can be paid for, he goes for his Smothering Tithe, which actually serves 2 purposes with his commander out. Ghyrson resolves and Rodrigo passes. Bal gets to his turn, draws the Tithe and fires the Dark Ritual. Having resolved, he puts the Smothering Tithe on the stack, and players groan as his turn 2 Tithe will provide too much value. We're back to David's turn, and he doesn't pay for the Tithe. He casts a Failure Stone and passes. Elder draws and also can pay for the Tithe. He plays an untapped Steam Vents paying 2 life and casts a Devoted Druid, which raises some suspicions. Rodrigo untaps and wins the Crypt roll. He draws and pays for the Tithe with the Crypt. He plays a Flooded Strand and cracks it for an untapped Steam Vents, also paying 2 life. He then casts a Loyal Apprentice and proceeds to combat, triggering it to create a Thopter and turns his team sideways towards Bal for 6 damage, and the Thopter triggers Ghyrson for 2 more damage and passes the turn. Bal draws and plays a Marsh Flats that he cracks for an Underground Sea. He casts his commander Marneus Calgar and passes the turn. David draws and doesn't pay for the Tithe, and the treasure being created triggers Marneus to draw a card. David then ponders for a second and casts his Talisman of Creativity. In response though, while everyone is tapped out, Bal casts a Mystical Tutor to search for a Fierce Guardianship to the top. Elder untaps and considers the Tithe, but ends up not paying, so Bal creates a treasure and draws the Fierce. Elder plays an untapped Breeding Pool and taps Devoted Druid for green, putting a -1/-1 counter on them to untap, to tap again for another green mana. He then casts a Neoform, sacrificing the Druid and searches for a Tribute Mage, which upon entering play he searches for a Nim Death Mantle again. He then transmutes Model Mixture to search for none other than Dockside Extortionist and passes the turn. Rodrigo once again is safe from his Crypt. He draws and this time he doesn't pay for the Tithe, and Bal creates a treasure and draws a card. Rodrigo then plays a Misty Rainforest and cracks it for a basic island. He then casts a Solve the Equation and searches for his own Fierce Guardianship, setting up for a sneaky win. He now casts his other tutor, but it's a gamble. Will it pan out with just 4 cards in hand? He searches for a Curiosity, hoping to draw 3 cards with a single attack. Bal rolls and he discards the Curiosity. First the Force on Dockside, and now this gamble. Bal is not letting Rodrigo play today. He proceeds to combat and now creates another Thopter from the Apprentice. He sends both Thopters towards Bal and the other 2 face David. Ghyrson triggers and Bal takes 4 more damage before Rodrigo passes. Bal draws, plays a Sea of Clouds and casts a Mystic Remora. He then goes to combat, attacking Rodrigo for 6 commander damage, hoping he can win this race if this drags on. We're back to David. He draws and doesn't pay for a Tithe, so Bal creates a treasure and draws a card. David plays an island and casts a Gilded Drake, but the drawn card from Baal was a Force of Will, which he hard casts, to maintain access to Fierce Guardianship. David then follows that with his Dockside Extortionist, entering play and triggering, but Baal does not crack his treasure, so David creates 7 treasures and with the 5 he casts his commander, Magnus the Red, ending his turn. Elder draws and is still behind on mana, so he doesn't pay for the tithe. Baal creates a treasure and draws. He does fire his Dockside and it resolves, but in response to the trigger, Baal cracks his 2 treasures for blue and black, and Rodrigo mentions an incoming Limdol's Vault. David cracks none and Elder creates 10 treasures. He then casts his commander the Swarmlord to get his own Fierce online and passes, since he does have the combo in hand but 2 opponents have more counter magic than him. Before mana empties, Baal uses it to indeed cast his Limdol's Vault, and it resolves. While they complain it takes too long to resolve, he just found what he wanted in the top 5, so we're back to Rodrigo's turn. He untaps and this time loses the crit roll, he draws and doesn't pay for the tithe, so Baal creates a treasure and draws a card. Rodrigo fires an Underworld Breach, and his graveyard, while not too filled with fodder to escape spells, does have a gamble that can easily find LED and Brain Freeze. Remore triggers and he can pay, so Baal draws, and fires his Fierce Guardianship right away, to which Rodrigo promptly responds with his own Fierce Guardianship, triggering Remore once again and Baal draws, but passes priority. David casts a Whispers of the Muse, not only to try to find something but also to feed Baal's fish. Tithe also triggers and he can't pay, so Baal creates another treasure and draws a card. Both Baal and David pass priority and it's now Elder's time to cast his own Fierce Guardianship, triggering Remora, and he doesn't pay. Well, this did the job, so Rodrigo sadly proceeds to his combat phase, creating another Thopter with which he attacks all 3 towards Elder, and the terrestrial creatures towards Baal. Ghyrson then triggers and Elder takes 6 more damage before Rodrigo passes. Baal untaps and lets the fish go. The whole 5 cards from Limdol's Vault were drawn, so he doesn't know what's coming, and exclaims as the top deck Mana Vault might have given him the game, as he mentions. He plays a Morphic Pool and follows it with a Grand Abolisher. It resolves, so he proceeds with a Mana Vault, following that with a Training Grounds. He now casts the 2 cards in hand he had from the start of the game, his Ashnod's Altar followed by his Chrome Mox, which he imprints a Muddle the Mixture, his last colored card in hand. This way he demonstrates a loop, where he uses his last 4 floating mana to activate Marneus to create 2/2/2 white to start his warriors. This triggers Marneus to draw a card, and he can now sacrifice the 2 tokens to Ashnod's Altar for 4 more mana to repeat this process, enabling him to draw the whole deck, and stopping whenever he wants with 4 colorless mana available. He now casts Isochron Scepter and imprints Dramatic Reversal on it, enabling him to generate infinite mana through his 2 rocks, and shows Walking Ballista as the outlet. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. Managorzer Hydra was a force to be reckoned with, pressuring players enough into corners, but eventually David's Cyclonic Rift and the early Legion War boss generated a synergetic board with his commander, and Skullclamp found the last cards he needed to win. The second game was mainly dominated by the turn 2 Smothering Tithe into turn 3 Marneus, generating not only mana but draws. Eventually, Rodrigo's attempt at going off was the major factor in Baal drawing enough to win with Remora and Marneus. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, TJ Rap, Ajimu, Drunken Hellscat, V, RJ, Heated Chill, Pina, Ricardo, Dragonstake, Katarina, Super Scaldi, Dog, Wyatt, Wicked, Zinan, New Gunsmith, and CJ Wally, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing, or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then.